Ava Carter, a 32-year-old logistics specialist, believes she has built a stable life with her charismatic boyfriend, Ethan Hale. From the outside, they look perfect. Stylish dinners, curated vacations, and endless social media smiles. But beneath the polished image, Ethan constantly undermines her confidence with subtle insults and comparisons. Everything collapses after Ava loses her job during a corporate merger. Instead of supporting her, Ethan coldly serves her eviction notice and breakup papers, calling her dead weight. Humiliated and emotionally shattered, Ava quietly disappears from their shared life and starts rebuilding herself from a tiny studio apartment. As she begins creating a new consulting business in silence, her best friend and lawyer, Rachel, helps her document every interaction. Meanwhile, Ethan's behavior grows more suspicious, hinting that his breakup may have been carefully planned long before Ava lost her job. My name is Ava Carter, and I was 32 years old when the man I loved looked me dead in the eyes and decided I was worthless. Funny thing is, I didn't cry. Not when Ethan slid the envelope across the kitchen counter. Not when he leaned back against the marble island with that detached expression, like he was discussing a utility bill instead of ending a 6-year relationship. And definitely not when he said the sentence that would replay in my head for months afterward. "You're dead weight, Ava. I deserve better." The strange part? He genuinely believed I would break. He expected tears, begging, rage. What he got instead was silence. And eventually, that silence destroyed him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how everything fell apart, you need to understand who Ethan Hale really was, and who I used to be before him. When we first met, I thought Ethan was magnetic. We were introduced at a mutual friend's rooftop party downtown. I still remember the way he laughed with his whole chest, the way every conversation somehow drifted toward him without effort. He was handsome in that polished, expensive way, fitted jackets, clean watch, confident smile. The kind of man who looked like he belonged in airport lounges and luxury hotel bars. At first, his confidence made me feel safe. Later, I realized it was just control dressed up as charm. Back then, though, I fell hard. I worked in logistics operations for a regional distribution company. Not glamorous, but stable. I liked systems, efficiency, structure. I liked solving problems nobody else noticed. Ethan worked in marketing strategy and loved reminding people of it. To outsiders, we looked perfect together. He made sure of that. There were wine country weekends, coordinated Halloween costumes, expensive brunch photos, rooftop selfies with captions about building together. Our relationship became one long performance, and I kept mistaking performance for love. The small humiliations started so gradually, I barely noticed them. At dinner parties, Ethan would laugh and call my job professional warehouse Tetris. His friends would chuckle awkwardly, while I smiled like it didn't bother me. Whenever one of his successful friends got promoted, Ethan found a way to compare us. "Jared just bought his girlfriend a BMW." Or, "Can you imagine making partner before 35? That's insane." At first, I thought he was just ambitious. Then I realized every comment was carefully aimed. Tiny cuts. Nothing dramatic enough to fight over. Just enough to make me question myself. One night, I mentioned wanting kids someday. He nearly choked on his drink. "With what schedule?" he asked. "You barely manage your own stress." Everybody laughed. I laughed too. That was the worst part. The moment something truly shifted happened on my birthday. A few weeks earlier, Ethan had spent days hinting about a designer watch he wanted. I saved up and bought it for him anyway, because I thought relationships meant generosity. Thoughtfulness. Effort. On my birthday, he handed me a gift bag in front of all our friends. Inside was a generic coffee machine, still in the clearance box. I smiled politely and thanked him. Then his friend Vanessa asked what I'd gotten him for his birthday. Ethan immediately jumped in. "Oh, Ava went overboard," he said with a laugh. "She always tries too hard." Everybody looked at the watch on his wrist. Then at my discount coffee machine. I remember feeling heat crawl up my neck. But I said nothing. Because by then, silence had become survival. 2 weeks later, my company announced the merger. Most of us knew layoffs were coming, but nobody expected entire departments to disappear overnight. Mine did. I sat in a beige conference room while HR delivered the speech with practiced sympathy. Restructuring. Budget realignment. Nothing personal. They handed me severance papers and escorted us out in groups. Just like that, 5 years of loyalty vanished. I texted Ethan from the train ride home. Lost my position today. Entire department got cut. I stared at my phone, waiting for reassurance. What I got was, "So what's your plan now?" That was it. No, "Are you okay?" No, "We'll figure it out." Just concern about inconvenience. I should have understood then. But love makes you stupid, long after logic starts screaming. That night, Ethan never came home. No text. No call. Nothing. I barely slept. The next morning, I heard keys rattle at the door around 8. Ethan walked inside wearing gym clothes and carrying 2 iced coffees. Both for himself. He didn't even look at me immediately. Instead, he calmly placed a thick envelope on the kitchen counter. Then he finally met my eyes. Cold. Detached. Prepared. "You're dead weight, Ava," he said quietly. "I deserve someone who adds to my life, not someone I have to carry." My chest tightened so hard I thought I might stop breathing. Then he added the final knife. "You've been holding me back for years." He turned and walked toward the bedroom. Like it was already done. Like I'd already disappeared. That's when I noticed something strange. Half his closet was already empty. The breakup hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned. Probably for weeks. Maybe months. And somehow, that realization hurt more than the insult itself. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the envelope. Inside were apartment transfer papers and a formal request for me to vacate voluntarily since the lease renewal had been shifted into his name 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. Before I lost my job. Meaning he'd prepared to leave me before my life collapsed. He'd just waited until I was weakest to pull the trigger. I sat there for a long time. No screaming. No shattered dishes. No dramatic breakdown. Just clarity. A terrifying kind of clarity. By noon, I'd packed a single suitcase. Clothes. Laptop. College notebook. Gym shoes. That was it. I took one last look around the apartment. Everything about it screamed Ethan. The expensive furniture. The designer candles. The carefully curated aesthetic built for photos instead of living. Suddenly, it all felt fake. Like a showroom pretending to be a relationship. I left my copy of The Key on the kitchen counter. Then I walked out without saying goodbye. The studio apartment I rented that afternoon was awful. Peeling paint. Thin walls. A flickering hallway light. The neighbor vacuumed at midnight like it was a religious ritual. But the moment I shut that door behind me, something unexpected happened. I could breathe. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. The room barely fit a mattress and folding table. I didn't care. It was mine. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. No alarm needed. Pain does that to you. I started doing push-ups until my arms shook. Then squats. Then sit-ups. Anything to keep my brain from replaying Ethan's voice. Dead weight. I showered cold, made eggs and oatmeal, opened my laptop, and started emailing every logistics contact I had. Warehouse managers. Distribution supervisors. Shipping coordinators. Anyone. I offered free efficiency assessments. Free walkthroughs. Free operational audits. 27 emails before noon. I tracked every response in a spreadsheet. Because if my life was collapsing, at least I could control the numbers. That evening, my best friend Rachel showed up carrying cheap takeout and a tiny printer under one arm. Rachel Moreno had been my friend since college and was now a junior litigation attorney with terrifying attention to detail. She looked around the tiny studio and nodded once. "Honestly," she said, This place has better energy than Ethan. I laughed for the first time in days. Then she became serious. Okay, from this moment forward, you document everything. Every text. Every email. Every financial statement. Every interaction. No emotional replies, she warned while setting up the printer on the floor. People like Ethan survive on reactions. Evidence beats emotion every time. She handed me a folder. I wrote on the tab, Ethan, Communications. Neither of us realized then how many folders there would eventually be. That same night, Ethan texted me. Hope you're okay. Nothing else. No apology. No accountability. Just 2 words pretending innocence. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I screenshotted it, printed it, filed it away, and went back to work. Because somewhere deep down, instinct was already whispering something dangerous. This wasn't over. Not even close. And if Ethan Hale thought humiliating me had ended the story, he had no idea what he'd just started. Ava throws herself into rebuilding her life with brutal discipline. Living in a cramped studio, she quietly launches a warehouse consulting side business that slowly begins gaining traction. While she works in silence, Ethan escalates the legal battle, demanding financial support and attempting to paint himself as the victim. With Rachel's help, Ava starts uncovering suspicious financial activity connected to Ethan, his glamorous friend, Vanessa, and a hidden LLC registered under his ex-girlfriend's name. As the evidence piles up, Ava realizes the breakup wasn't emotional chaos. It was a carefully orchestrated financial setup. The emotional tension rises as Ethan begins sensing he's losing control over her. The routine saved me. Not emotionally. Not spiritually. Just mechanically. And sometimes that's enough to survive. Every morning started at 5. Workout. Cold shower. Eggs and oatmeal. Emails. Spreadsheets. Applications. Client outreach. Then gym again before bed. No alcohol. No scrolling through old photos. No checking Ethan's social media. Rachel called it grief with structure. I called it survival. 2 weeks after moving into the studio, I finally got my first real opportunity. A warehouse manager named Luis responded to one of my cold emails. His message was short. We're behind on outbound schedules and bleeding labor hours. If you think you can help, come Tuesday morning. I spent the next 3 days preparing like my life depended on it. Because it did. I printed traffic flow maps, researched their shipping volume, made operational checklists, dock timing estimates, staging lane diagrams. I didn't sleep much. Fear has a way of turning preparation into obsession. The warehouse sat in an industrial district, surrounded by cracked asphalt and faded loading signs. The moment I stepped inside, I saw the problem. Chaos. Returns mixed with outbound freight. Forklift traffic crisscrossing constantly. Employees wasting motion every few minutes because nobody had designed the floor flow properly. Luis crossed his arms while I walked. You see something? He asked skeptically. Too many things, I answered. For the next hour, I timed movements with my phone. Watched pallet routes. Tracked staging delays. One employee spent almost 7 minutes relocating a single return shipment because outbound inventory blocked access. 7 minutes. 3 times an hour. Across multiple employees. The waste was enormous. I sketched a quick layout in my notebook. Separate returns completely, I explained. Color code staging lanes. Reassign dock 3 for overflow intake only. Luis stared at the page. That fixes this? It cuts movement in half. You sure? No, I admitted honestly, but I'm confident enough to test it. That answer made him trust me more than fake certainty ever could. 3 days later, he called. It worked. I closed my eyes when he said it. Not because the money mattered, because I finally felt useful again. He offered me a short consulting contract. Nothing huge. But when the payment hit my account, I nearly cried in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. Not from sadness,
Relief.
Pure relief. The first thing I bought wasn't clothes or expensive food. It was a real desk.
Second-hand.
Slightly scratched. Heavy as hell. I carried it up 3 flights of stairs by myself and nearly dislocated my shoulder doing it. But when I finally set my laptop on that desk inside my tiny apartment, it felt like reclaiming dignity. Rachel came over that night holding cheap wine and stared dramatically at the desk. "Well," she said, "look at you, corporate queen." I laughed. Then she slid a thick folder toward me, and the mood changed immediately. He filed preliminary demands. I opened the document slowly. My stomach tightened with every page. Ethan wasn't just asking me to leave quietly. He wanted compensation. According to the filing, he had emotionally and financially supported me throughout our relationship and believed he was entitled to reimbursement connected to shared lifestyle expenses. I actually laughed reading it. A sharp, exhausted laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." Rachel didn't smile. "He's not joking." The filing requested partial reimbursement for rent contributions, travel expenses, and even renovations made to the apartment during our relationship. Then came the part that truly stunned me. He also requested temporary restrictions on any future business contracts until financial disclosures were completed. "He wants leverage," Rachel explained calmly. "If you start succeeding too fast, he loses narrative control."
Narrative control.
That phrase stayed with me all night, because that's exactly what Ethan had always cared about. The story. The image. The appearance of superiority. I should have been angry. Instead, I became focused. Rachel helped me organize everything. Every expense. Every message. Every timeline. We converted my studio apartment into a war room made of binders and sticky notes. One shelf became communications. Another, financials. Then, timelines. And finally, Ethan, inconsistencies. That last folder would eventually become the thickest. Ethan, meanwhile, continued pretending online that he was thriving. Gym selfies. Luxury dinners. Rooftop cocktails. Smug captions about protecting your peace. Then, one photo stopped me cold. He stood inside a luxury condo I'd never seen before.
Modern kitchen.
Floor-to-ceiling windows.
Designer furniture.
Caption. Fresh starts. I zoomed in instinctively, and there, reflected faintly in the glass behind him, was Vanessa. The same Vanessa from our birthday dinner. The same just a friend Ethan constantly defended. My chest tightened. Not heartbreak this time.
Recognition.
The timeline bothered me. So I started digging. Not obsessively.
Systematically.
I still had access to old shared budgeting apps we'd used during the relationship. Most were disconnected. But fragments remained. Transactions. Payment histories.
Transfer records.
One recurring name kept appearing. VH Creative Solutions, LLC. Payments labeled. Consulting. Brand work. Strategy. Thousands of dollars transferred during the final months of our relationship. The strange part? Vanessa wasn't a consultant. She was a Pilates instructor turned influencer. The numbers made no sense. I printed everything and handed it to Rachel. She scanned the documents quietly. Then her eyebrows lifted. "This company was registered 4 months before your breakup." "What?" "And look here," she continued, tapping the address line. "The registered office matches Ethan's new condo building." Silence filled the room. Suddenly, the entire breakup rearranged itself in my mind. The apartment transfer. The prepared paperwork. The emotional detachment. The luxury condo. Vanessa. The timing wasn't impulsive. It was staged. Rachel subpoenaed additional financial disclosures. And when the documents finally came back weeks later, everything got worse. Or better, depending on perspective. The LLC had processed over $90,000 during the final stretch of our relationship. Most transferred from accounts connected to Ethan's freelance marketing deals. Money hidden before separation. Money intentionally routed elsewhere. Money never disclosed. Rachel leaned back slowly after reviewing the paperwork. "Well," she muttered, "your ex-boyfriend is either unbelievably arrogant or unbelievably stupid. Can it help us?" "Oh, Ava," she said, smiling for the first time in days. "This changes everything." While the legal pressure built quietly in the background, my business kept growing. Luis referred me to another warehouse. Then another. I developed a system. Walkthroughs.
Efficiency reports.
Traffic flow redesigns. Simple recommendations backed by measurable data. Nothing flashy. Just results. Managers trusted me because I spoke plainly. No corporate jargon. No inflated promises. Just, this saves labor. This reduces delays. This fixes the bottleneck. People respected clarity. Especially exhausted people. One evening around midnight, my phone buzzed. "Ethan." I stared at the screen before opening the message. "You really think you can ignore me forever?" I felt something strange reading it. Not fear. Not sadness.
Annoyance.
Like hearing an old song you used to love but now couldn't stand. I screenshotted the message. Filled it. Then went back to refining a warehouse staging proposal. That was the moment I realized something important. I was no longer emotionally orbiting him. He was orbiting me. The following week, Rachel arrived carrying coffee and a dangerous expression. "That look means either good news or felony charges," I said. "Good news," she replied. "Probably." She dropped another folder onto the desk. Inside were the finalized financial disclosures tied to Ethan's hidden transfers. The dates lined up perfectly. The condo deposit. The LLC registration. The breakup paperwork. Everything had been prepared before I lost my job. Meaning, Ethan hadn't abandoned me because I became dead weight. He had already planned his exit while pretending to love me. And somehow, that truth hurt more than the breakup itself. Because betrayal is one thing. Performance is another. Rachel pointed at a highlighted section. He also underreported his freelance income. I blinked. Seriously? Mm-hmm. And because he filed temporary restrictions against your future business growth while hiding assets himself. She paused, smiling slowly. Judge Holloway is going to love this. For the first time since the breakup, I smiled back. Not because I wanted revenge. Because reality was finally becoming visible. That night, I sat alone at my secondhand desk surrounded by folders and spreadsheets. The studio apartment hummed softly with distant plumbing noises and city traffic. Months earlier, I would have been curled up crying over Ethan, wondering how to fix us. Now, I was building something. Quietly, carefully, without needing his approval. And somewhere deep down, I started realizing the terrifying truth. Losing him hadn't destroyed my life. It had exposed it. As Ava's consulting business steadily grows, Rachel uncovers devastating legal leverage against Ethan. Old couples therapy recordings reveal that Ethan privately admitted he planned to manipulate the breakup long before leaving Ava. Meanwhile, Ethan begins acting increasingly unstable as his financial concealment starts unraveling in court. Public cracks appear in his perfect image, while Ava quietly transforms from abandoned girlfriend into disciplined entrepreneur. The emotional tension intensifies as courtroom strategy, betrayal, and psychological manipulation collide. When your life falls apart, you start discovering pieces of yourself buried under survival. Sometimes that's healing. Sometimes it's horrifying. And sometimes, it's 6 forgotten therapy recordings that completely change everything you thought you knew. About a year before the breakup, Ethan convinced me we needed couples counseling. At the time, I thought it meant he cared enough to fight for us. Now I understand it differently. He wanted documentation.
Control. Narrative.
Dr. Warren was the therapist. Mid-60s. Soft-spoken. calm in a way that made silence feel heavier than words. Some sessions were together. Others were split individually. He said private sessions helped him understand relationship dynamics more clearly. At the beginning of each appointment, he'd press record and remind us both that audio files would later be shared with both parties for reflection purposes. I barely listened to them afterward. I archived the files into cloud storage and forgot they existed. Until Rachel and I started organizing evidence. I found the recordings accidentally around 2 in the morning. I'd been sorting financial documents for hours when I stumbled onto an old folder labeled Therapy 2024. 6 audio files, each around an hour long. Out of curiosity more than intention, I clicked one. At first, it was painfully ordinary. Me talking about stress. Ethan complaining about lack of ambition. The usual emotional gymnastics. Then came one of Ethan's private sessions. I recognized the exact tone in his voice immediately.
Controlled. Smooth. Calculated.
Like a salesman pitching strategy. And then he said something that made my entire body go cold. I just need her to look unstable long enough for me to leave clean. I froze. The audio continued. Dr. Warren asked carefully, "So you've already decided to end the relationship?" "Yes," Ethan answered calmly. "But if Ava thinks it's her fault, the transition becomes easier."
Transition.
Like I was a business merger, not a person. I sat perfectly still in the dark, listening to the rest. Ethan talked about timing,
Optics. Finances.
how people naturally sympathized with driven men trapped in stagnant relationships. Then he laughed quietly and added, "She's emotional. Eventually she'll react badly. I just need patience." The room felt suddenly smaller. I remembered sitting in that waiting room during his private sessions, probably scrolling through my phone, thinking we were trying to heal. Meanwhile, he was strategizing my emotional collapse like a legal campaign. I replayed the recording 3 times. Not because I doubted it, because part of me still wanted to. I emailed the timestamp to Rachel immediately. Subject line: Listen to 3814. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Rachel didn't even say hello. Oh my God. I stared at the ceiling, silently. "She admitted everything?" she asked. I corrected automatically.
Silence.
Then, "Ava, this changes the entire case." The next week became a blur of legal motions. Rachel contacted Dr. Warren directly. To his credit, the man was meticulous. He confirmed the recordings were authentic. Metadata intact. Original timestamps preserved. Both parties had consented to recording and file distribution. Chain of custody clean. Legally usable. Rachel nearly looked excited explaining it. "We're not using this for humiliation," she said while organizing documents across my desk. "We're using it to establish intent."
Intent.
That word mattered in court.
A lot.
Because suddenly Ethan wasn't just an ex-boyfriend demanding compensation. He was a man who deliberately manipulated emotional circumstances while concealing financial activity. The optics flipped overnight. Meanwhile, my business kept growing quietly. 1 warehouse contract became 3. 3 became 5. I started hiring temporary analysts to help collect operational data during walkthroughs. Nothing huge. Nothing glamorous. But enough to finally breathe without constantly checking my bank account. One afternoon, I signed paperwork incorporating my consulting company officially. Holding those documents felt surreal. Months earlier, Ethan called me dead weight. Now companies were paying for my expertise. The irony tasted almost cruel. Then Ethan texted me again. This time, the tone had changed completely. "I heard business is going well. Proud of you." I stared at the message for a long moment. Proud. As if he hadn't abandoned me at my lowest point. As if he hadn't carefully engineered my collapse behind closed doors. 3 dots appeared again. Another message. "Maybe we should talk privately before court escalates things." I actually laughed. Not loudly. Just one exhausted laugh into the empty apartment. Because suddenly, I understood. He was nervous. Rachel filed motions to introduce the recordings into evidence. Ethan's attorney fought aggressively to block them. Claimed therapy confidentiality.
Emotional privacy.
Context manipulation. But there was one problem. Both Ethan and I had legally received copies after every session, which meant the recordings belonged to both of us equally. At the hearing, Judge Holloway reviewed the authentication paperwork carefully. Then he adjusted his glasses and said the sentence that visibly drained color from Ethan's lawyer's face. Motion granted. Just like that. The recordings entered public court record. When Rachel and I stepped outside afterward, she exhaled slowly. He built his own trap. I looked down at the courthouse stairs. No, I answered quietly. He just assumed I'd stay broken. The fallout started almost immediately. Not publicly at first.
Privately. Quietly.
Ethan's carefully maintained confidence began cracking. His emails became shorter, more aggressive, more emotional. Rachel noticed it too. He's losing control of the narrative, she explained one evening. People like Ethan depend on emotional positioning. Once facts enter the room, they panic. And panic he did. Depositions began 2 weeks later. Nothing like television. No screaming. No dramatic shouting. Just fluorescent lighting, legal pads, and uncomfortable questions. Ethan arrived wearing an expensive charcoal suit and the same arrogant expression I used to mistake for confidence. Vanessa sat outside the conference room, pretending not to look nervous. Rachel started calmly. Routine questions first. Dates. Addresses. Income disclosures. Then she slid one document across the table. Can you explain the purpose of VH Creative Solutions, LLC? Ethan's expression barely shifted. But barely was enough. It was consulting work. What type specifically? Marketing? For whom? Various clients. Rachel nodded thoughtfully, then slid forward the bank transfers. Can you explain why over $90,000 passed through this LLC during your separation from Ms. Carter without disclosure?
Silence.
Tiny.
Brief.
But devastating. Ethan finally leaned back. I'd need to review context. Rachel smiled slightly. Of course, take your time. That smile terrified people, because it meant she already knew the answer. The deeper the questioning went, the worse it became. Condo lease dates. Transfer timelines. Business income discrepancies. Everything lined up too perfectly. By the end of the deposition, Ethan looked irritated instead of confident. And irritation was dangerous for someone like him, because underneath his polished image lived entitlement. That night, I returned home exhausted. The city outside my apartment windows glowed orange beneath heavy rain. I sat at my desk, staring at the folders stacked beside me. Evidence. Timelines. Screenshots. Months ago, all I wanted was for Ethan to love me properly. Now I just wanted truth documented clearly enough that nobody could distort it anymore. My phone buzzed again.
Unknown number.
I answered cautiously.
Silence.
Then Ethan's voice. Soft.
Controlled.
Ava, are you really doing all this? I leaned back slowly. No, I said calmly. You did. He exhaled sharply. You're trying to ruin me. The irony nearly made me dizzy. You ruined yourself the moment you treated people like strategy. Silence again. Then his voice hardened instantly. There's still time to settle quietly. That tone. There it was. The same cold superiority. The same manipulation hiding beneath fake calm. For one dangerous second, old instincts flared inside me. The instinct to soothe him. To de-escalate. To make things easier. Then I remembered the recording. I just need her to look unstable long enough for me to leave clean. And suddenly, all emotional attachment evaporated. "You should probably call your lawyer," I said quietly. Then I hung up. Later that night, Rachel reviewed the updated filings while eating terrible takeout noodles on my floor. "You okay?" she asked carefully. I thought about the question honestly. "No," I admitted, "but I'm clear." And clarity is terrifying once you finally get it. Because after that, you can never unknow the truth again. The courtroom battle reaches its breaking point as Rachel exposes Ethan's hidden financial schemes, manipulation tactics, and therapy recordings in front of the judge. Ethan's perfect public image begins crumbling under pressure, while Vanessa quietly distances herself from the disaster. Ava remains emotionally restrained, which only makes Ethan spiral harder. As the court dismantles his credibility piece by piece, Ethan suffers a public emotional collapse that changes the entire outcome of the case. But even after losing legally, he still believes Ava belongs to him emotionally, setting up one final confrontation. Courtrooms don't look dramatic in real life. Not at first. Most of the time they're too cold, too fluorescent, too ordinary for the amount of damage happening inside them. But destruction doesn't need cinematic lighting. Sometimes all it needs is paperwork and patience. The hearing started at 9 a.m. Rachel arrived carrying 3 binders and an iced coffee larger than her actual emotional tolerance for stupidity. I wore a charcoal blazer and minimal makeup. Not because appearances mattered to me anymore, but because I refused to look fragile in front of Ethan. When he walked into the courtroom, I barely recognized him. Not physically.
Energetically.
The old Ethan moved like he owned every room he entered. This version looked stretched too thin beneath the surface. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect posture. But his eyes kept flicking toward Rachel's binders, toward me, toward the growing awareness that control was slipping. Vanessa wasn't with him this time. That told me more than anything else. Judge Holloway entered precisely on time. The room stood, then sat, and the dismantling began. Ethan's attorney opened aggressively. They tried reframing everything as relationship bitterness, claimed the recordings were emotionally selective, claimed Ethan's hidden transfers were merely business restructuring, claimed I was weaponizing personal grievances because I struggled emotionally after the breakup. Rachel let them finish completely. No interruptions. No reactions. Just notes. That terrified people more than arguments. When it became Rachel's turn, she stood calmly and approached the evidence monitor. "Your Honor," she began evenly. "This case is actually very simple once timelines are established." Click. The first screen appeared.
A timeline. Apartment transfer paperwork. LLC registration. Condo lease.
Breakup documentation. All dated before my layoff. The courtroom became very quiet. Rachel continued. "Mr. Hale has repeatedly claimed Ms. Carter became emotionally and financially burdensome after losing her job." Another click. "Yet evidence shows he began financially separating assets and preparing relocation months beforehand." Ethan shifted visibly in his chair. Tiny movement. But enough. Rachel then displayed the hidden transfer records tied to VH Creative Solutions. $90,000.
Undisclosed.
Moved during active separation. Judge Holloway studied the records carefully, then looked directly at Ethan. "Were these disclosures omitted intentionally?" Ethan's lawyer answered before he could. "There was confusion regarding classification," Rachel interrupted smoothly. "Then perhaps the therapy recordings may clarify intent." The room changed instantly. Even Ethan's attorney went still. Rachel played the audio. Not all of it. Just enough. Ethan's voice filled the courtroom speakers calmly and clearly. "I just need her to look unstable long enough for me to leave clean."
Silence.
Nobody moved. Rachel let the silence breathe, then played the second section. "If Ava thinks the breakup is her fault, everything becomes easier financially." My stomach still twisted hearing it publicly, even after dozens of replays. Because there's something uniquely horrifying about hearing somebody discuss your emotional destruction like a negotiation strategy. Judge Holloway removed his glasses slowly. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "is that your voice?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes." The judge nodded once, then wrote something down. That tiny pen movement somehow felt louder than shouting. Rachel continued methodically. "No theatrics. No emotional speeches. Just evidence. Bank records. Lease dates. Communication logs. Income discrepancies." Then she introduced Ethan's post-breakup messages. The proud of you texts. The requests to settle privately. The late-night calls. All sent while simultaneously pursuing aggressive legal restrictions against my business. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. Then came the moment everything truly collapsed. Ethan interrupted. At first, it was subtle. Small comments under his breath. Frustrated sighs. But when Rachel displayed screenshots of his social media posts mocking unmotivated partners during the exact week of my unemployment, he snapped. "This is insane," he barked suddenly. "She's turning normal relationship issues into character assassination." Judge Holloway looked up sharply. "Mr. Hale." "No," Ethan continued, voice rising. "She's acting like I committed some crime because I didn't want to spend my life carrying someone with no ambition." The courtroom froze. And just like that, the mask slipped completely. Rachel didn't react emotionally. She simply asked one question. "Mr. Hale, at the time you called Ms. Carter dead weight, how many undisclosed funds had already been transferred through your hidden LLC?" Ethan stared at her, then at me. Something ugly flashed across his face.
Resentment. Humiliation. Panic.
And finally, rage. "You think you're innocent?" he snapped toward me directly. "You sat around playing victim while I built everything." I blinked slowly. Built everything? I had supported him emotionally for years. Covered expenses during his career transitions. Edited presentations at 2 in the morning. Handled logistics during his freelance launches. But people like Ethan rewrite history instinctively. Because accountability threatens identity. Judge Holloway slammed his pen down. "Mr. Hale, you will control yourself immediately." The room went dead silent again. Even Ethan seemed startled by his own outburst. Rachel, meanwhile, delivered the killing blow quietly. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this behavior reflects exactly what Ms. Carter experienced privately for years." Then she displayed the final document. The hidden condo lease signed before my termination. Proof he planned the separation while still financially intertwining our lives publicly. There was nowhere left for him to hide. When Judge Holloway finally delivered his ruling, his voice remained calm, which somehow made it harsher. The court finds clear evidence of bad faith financial concealment. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The judge continued. Restrictions against Ms. Carter's business operations are lifted immediately. Rachel wrote notes calmly. I just sat still.
Numb.
Then came the final strike. Restitution is awarded based on undisclosed transferred assets and deceptive financial conduct during separation proceedings. Ethan visibly paled. Not dramatically. Just enough for reality to finally appear. The hearing ended minutes later. People slowly gathered papers. The clerk avoided eye contact with Ethan entirely. Even his own attorney looked exhausted. Meanwhile, Rachel leaned toward me quietly. That, she whispered, was catastrophic for him. But the strangest part? I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Because once someone fully reveals themselves, grief changes shape. Outside the courtroom, Ethan finally approached me directly, for the first time in months. Ava? His voice sounded different now. Smaller. Less polished. I turned slowly. For a brief second, I saw the man I once loved buried underneath panic and ego and resentment. Then he spoke again. And ruined it immediately. You could stop this if you wanted. There it was. Still trying to make me responsible for his consequences. I looked at him calmly. No, I answered softly. You could have stopped this when you still had honesty. His jaw tightened. You're enjoying this. I almost laughed. Enjoying? The sleepless nights? The betrayal? The humiliation? The years spent shrinking myself to protect his ego? No, I said quietly. I'm surviving it. That answer hit him harder than anger ever could. Because people like Ethan understand conflict. What they cannot survive is emotional detachment. As Rachel and I walked toward the courthouse exit, she glanced sideways at me. You okay? I thought about it honestly, then looked back at the courtroom doors behind us. At some point, I said slowly, you stop mourning the person. Rachel stayed quiet. You start mourning the time. And somehow, that hurt even more. After the courtroom disaster, Ethan's carefully constructed life rapidly collapses. His reputation deteriorates, clients abandon him, and even people close to him begin distancing themselves. Meanwhile, Ava's consulting company expands into a thriving business, and she launches a foundation honoring her late father. But Ethan refuses to emotionally let go. In a final series of confrontations, he swings between regret, blame, desperation, and entitlement. The story concludes with Ava finally understanding that true closure is not revenge, it is peace, distance, and refusing to carry someone else's chaos anymore. Final. The appeal came 2 weeks later. Of course it did. People like Ethan never lose quietly. According to the filing, the restitution ruling would cause irreparable financial hardship and unfairly damage his ability to rebuild professionally. Rachel read the motion while eating almonds like she personally hated every individual nut. He's not appealing innocence, she said dryly. He's appealing consequences. The distinction mattered, because even Ethan's legal team understood the evidence was overwhelming. They just hoped sympathy might reduce the damage. At first, the appeal process looked annoyingly effective. Friends wrote character letters describing Ethan as misunderstood. Former colleagues praised his ambition. One statement even described him as emotionally generous. Rachel nearly choked reading that line. But then, something unexpected happened. People started backing away from him.
Quietly.
Strategically.
One former friend withdrew their statement entirely after reviewing the therapy transcripts. Another submitted a revised affidavit admitting Ethan had openly discussed positioning himself favorably before the breakup. Every contradiction weakened him further. And Ethan, predictably, made things worse himself. Instead of disappearing from social media, he doubled down. One night, he posted a balcony photo holding wine with the caption, "Some people destroy the ones who built them." The comments exploded instantly. Some supported him. Others mocked him. A few referenced the public court records directly. I screenshotted the post automatically and filed it away. Not because it mattered legally anymore, because documenting him had become instinct. Meanwhile, his professional life began collapsing, piece by piece. Clients distanced themselves. Brand partnerships quietly disappeared. A marketing agency removed his profile from their website entirely. Another issued a vague statement about organizational restructuring. Translation?
Liability.
Once people associate dishonesty with your name, business changes overnight. And Ethan had built his entire identity around perception. 3 months after the ruling, he filed for bankruptcy protection. Rachel almost smiled reading the paperwork. Here's the fun part, she said. Because the restitution judgment involved fraudulent concealment, the court ruled the debt non-dischargeable, meaning bankruptcy wouldn't erase it. Consequences survived. Rachel closed the folder slowly. He really thought he was smarter than everyone. I stared out my office window at the warehouse district below. No, I said quietly. He just thought charm counted as intelligence. By then, my own life barely resembled the woman crying alone in a studio apartment. My consulting company had grown faster than I expected. 6 steady contracts became 10. Then regional partnerships. Then expansion. I hired analysts, operations coordinators,
Administrative staff.
The tiny second-hand desk from my studio apartment now sat inside my real office, overlooking downtown traffic. I kept it intentionally. A reminder. Not of pain. Of survival. The foundation launched that spring. Named after my father. Its purpose was simple. Provide operational training and mentorship for underprivileged teenagers interested in logistics and technology careers. Nothing flashy. Just opportunity. The kind my father believed every hardworking person deserved. The first workshop filled beyond capacity. Watching teenagers walk through warehouse simulations with excitement in their eyes nearly broke me emotionally. Not because of success, because for the first time in years, my life finally felt meaningful outside survival. That was when Ethan showed up again. Of course he did. My assistant buzzed my office around 3 in the afternoon. "There's a man here asking for 5 minutes," she said cautiously. I already knew. Some instincts never leave you. When I stepped into the lobby, Ethan stood near the reception desk, holding a sealed envelope. I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked terrible, because he looked ordinary. The expensive arrogance was gone. No tailored confidence. No polished performance. Just exhaustion wrapped in expensive fabric. He handed me the envelope silently. Inside was a photograph. Our old beach wedding picture. Sunset behind us. Both smiling, like forever was guaranteed. On the back, in Ethan's handwriting, "I was wrong about you. About everything." My chest tightened unexpectedly. Not from love.
Memory.
There's a difference. Ethan looked at me carefully. "I didn't understand your silence before," he said quietly. "Now I do." For one dangerous second, I saw genuine regret in his eyes. And honestly, that made me sadder than anger ever had. Because regret doesn't undo damage. It just proves the damage mattered. I slid the photo back into the envelope. "I hope you heal," I told him softly. Nothing more. His expression flickered, like he wanted additional words.
Forgiveness. Comfort. Permission.
I gave him none. Then I walked back toward the elevator, and he didn't follow. Rachel asked later if I wanted to preserve the note legally. I shook my head. No need. She studied me carefully. "You still love him?" I thought about that longer than expected. Then answered honestly. "No, I just remember who I thought he was." The final hearing arrived months later. Purely procedural. Finalize restitution compliance. Close remaining filings. Everybody expected 15 minutes maximum. Even Judge Holloway looked half bored reviewing the docket. Ethan represented himself this time. Couldn't afford continued legal counsel anymore. When he walked into the courtroom, something about him felt permanently dimmed. Like somebody had lowered the brightness on his personality. No expensive watch. No perfect posture. No performance. Just fatigue. The judge prepared to close proceedings quickly. Then Ethan asked permission to speak. Rachel visibly tensed beside me. Judge Holloway sighed. Briefly. Ethan stood slowly, then turned toward me instead of the judge. The courtroom disappeared around us. "Ava," his voice cracked slightly. "I know I lost."
Silence.
"I know I ruined everything." I stayed perfectly still. He swallowed hard. "When we first met, I really did love you." Those words hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed they fixed anything, because part of me believed they were true. And that made the tragedy worse. Ethan continued speaking quietly. "I got obsessed with image, success, comparison. I kept blaming you for things that were broken inside me." The courtroom remained completely silent. Even Judge Holloway stopped writing. "I thought ambition meant constantly needing more," Ethan whispered. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people as people." His eyes finally met mine directly. "I was cruel to you." Simple sentence. Brutal sentence. True sentence. And tragically, far too late. Judge Holloway eventually interrupted, gently. Mr. Hale, this proceeding is not intended for personal reconciliation. Ethan nodded slowly and sat down. The documents were signed. The case officially closed. Just like that. Years of emotional destruction reduced to stamped paperwork. As everyone gathered their things, Ethan remained seated watching me, waiting.
Hoping.
For what? I'll never know. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe absolution. Maybe proof he still mattered emotionally. I walked past him quietly without stopping. Because some endings don't need dialogue. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph of Max, the golden retriever Ethan had kept after the breakup. On the back, he'd written, "Found him a family with a yard. He's happy. Thought you should know." No manipulation. No guilt. No hidden agenda. Just information. I filed it away gently with the rest. Months passed. Then one evening, after leaving the foundation office late, I saw Ethan waiting outside again. Rain misted softly across the parking lot. He looked thinner. Tired.
Nervous.
"Ava, please," he said immediately. 5 minutes. Rachel stood beside me, carrying case folders, and quietly whispered, "Your call." I nodded once. Rachel stepped back. Ethan looked at me like someone staring at a closed door they still hoped might open. "I miss us," he admitted quietly. "I miss who we were before everything got poisoned." I stayed silent. "I don't want money," he continued desperately. "I don't want anything, I want a chance to fix this somehow." Rain tapped softly against nearby cars. For one long moment, neither of us moved. Then Ethan whispered the sentence that finally ended everything. "I'd do anything to get you back." And suddenly, I understood. Not emotionally.
Completely.
Because he still thought love was possession.
Transaction. Achievement.
Something retrievable. I looked at him calmly. "The time to fix it," I said softly, "was when you still had honesty." His face tightened instantly. And there it was again. That old shift. Softness turning into resentment. "You really think you're better than me now?" he snapped suddenly. "You think success changed who you are?" I almost smiled sadly. Because even after everything, he still couldn't understand. "This was never about being better than you," I answered quietly. "It was about finally stopping myself from becoming smaller for you." That hit him harder than yelling ever could. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Rain kept falling between us. Finally, he turned and walked away into the parking lot without another word. And this time, I knew he wasn't coming back. That was the real ending. Not the court ruling. Not the bankruptcy. Not the public humiliation. This, the moment I realized Ethan never truly missed me. He missed access.
Control.
The version of Ava Carter who abandoned herself to keep him comfortable. That woman no longer existed. Later that night, I drove home while talking on the phone with Daniel, the man I'd slowly started seeing months after the case ended. Patient. Grounded. Kind in quiet ways. We talked about books. Dinner plans. Completely ordinary things. And somewhere during that conversation, I realized something almost terrifying. Peace feels unfamiliar when you've spent years surviving emotional chaos. But once you experience it, you never want to return. Sometimes I still think about Ethan. Not with hatred. Not with longing. Just awareness. Maybe he changed. Maybe he didn't. That part no longer belongs to me. Because closure was never revenge. It was choosing silence over another argument. Distance over another apology. Peace over another performance. And honestly, that was worth more than winning in court ever could be.